Bill C-11, which involves an overhaul of the Broadcasting Act for the first time in 3 decades to include the online platforms, is currently before the House of Commons Heritage Committee, but the government wants that study shut down now to get the bill passed by the House before the summer break, even though it's not likely to be passed by the Senate until the fall. So what's the big rush, and why are some critics pressing for changes to the bill? Let's bring in 3 members of the House of Commons Heritage Committee to debate that. Chris Bittle is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Heritage. Rick Perkins is an Associate Member of the committee. He's a Conservative MP. And Peter Julian is the Heritage Critic for the NDP. It's good to see you all. Mr. Bittle, let me start with you. What's the urgency to get this bill pushed through the House in the next few days if it's not going to be passed by the Senate until the fall?
Well, I don't know that urgency is the right word. We do want to see this through, but we agreed with the Conservatives in terms of the amount of time and witnesses that they wanted to call. We exceeded that number. And then we've spent 2 weeks worth of committee time just on filibuster. Mr. Perkins, who's here, is not a regular member of the committee, but showed up for 3 hours last week to filibuster and talk it through. There's no end in sight. There's no positive contribution from the opposition. And we need to get this bill through to help our creators, including digital-first creators, because as you said, the Broadcasting Act hasn't been amended in over 30 years when I was still in elementary school. And the landscape has changed significantly. And so we need to get this through. We need to get it on the Senate, which I know will engage in thoughtful study. But we've spent a lot of time on this, and we need to get it through.
All right, Mr. Perkins, your party, you just heard it again, is accused of filibustering the bill. You personally accused of taking part in that at the Heritage Committee. There have been 29 hours of debate, 48 witnesses. How do you respond to accusations of filibustering, and what are your party's key objections to this bill that you think needs more study?
Well, the bill is not clear, and the CRTC and the minister have contradicted each other on whether or not individual user-generated content will actually be regulated by the CRTC. And so we're very concerned about that. The government imposed closure at second reading stage. I spoke to the bill in the House at second reading stage. And now they're imposing a form of closure on committee witnesses. Committees are the destiny, in charge of their own destiny, and quite often in committees they don't get to all the witnesses that they want to see in the time frame that is allotted. So they often alter their schedule in order to hear for more witnesses. Right. We were wanting to hear from more witnesses. There have been a number of concerned people who earn their income through the internet that have concerns with this bill, and we think better amendments come from hearing from witnesses. And now the government has done the very unusual step of putting closure not only on the amount of time we have for clause by clause in committee, but also only 1 day of report stage and 1 day of third reading. It's very unprecedented that the government is doing that kind of closure.
All right. Mr. Julian, does the NDP support fast-tracking this bill through the House, and if so, why?
Well, it's not fast-tracking at all, Peter. It's been nothing but chaos and disruption for the last few weeks. In fact, the Conservatives even filibustered witnesses, like the chair of the CRTC, that they filibustered to prevent him from testifying in the leadership of the CRTC. It's been chaotic. It's been bizarre. All the other parties submitted amendments more than a week and a half ago. We just learned on Friday that the Conservatives have submitted their amendments. And part of the job of a committee is to take the witnesses, the vast majority of whom have been supportive of C-11, and many of whom have had suggestions on how to improve the bill, is to actually take that witness testimony and those suggested amendments and work through them and vote on them. That's our job. And the Conservatives have stopped systematically the committee from actually doing its job on behalf of Canadians. So we believe we need to look at all of those amendments. We need to have votes to make sure that the committee decides whether or not those amendments will carry or not. But are you
satisfied that every voice that needs to be heard on this has been heard?
Well, the Conservatives were blocking witnesses from actually coming forward. We tried to work to have some further witnesses come in, but the reality is that all the witnesses have had their opportunity to provide that important information on how to improve the bill.
Okay.
But if we never get to the amendments, then we don't get to that actual possibility of amending the legislation.
Okay. Mr. Bittle, one of the big criticisms of this bill, and Mr. Perkins alluded to it, and you've heard it from some witnesses at your committees, that it seeks to regulate social media platforms the same way as it would regulate the big broadcasters and cable companies and streaming services. How concerned should Canadians be about the regulating of user-generated media on social media sites through this legislation?
They shouldn't be concerned. We've been clear. Platforms have obligations under this legislation. Users will have no obligations. There are several clauses throughout the bill, including a clause that Conservatives brought in under the predecessor legislation, C10, that's still in the legislation to protect user-generated content. This is about going after and ensuring that foreign tech giants like YouTube and TikTok have to contribute to Canadian culture, like we would expect Bell and Rogers to do so. Why would Google and TikTok and other major companies get off scot-free? It's about ensuring that that companies contribute to that to Canadian culture, which is something I hope we all agree on, and something that even digital creators should be able to benefit from, because we've heard lots of testimony that YouTube and TikTok aren't contributing and aren't even paying their own artists very well.
All right, let me move to Mr. Perkins. Mr. Perkins, why don't you accept those reassurances from the government side?
Well, we've been asking for them to issue their direction to the CRTC that clarifies it, and the government is refusing to do so. The bill it requires that the providers like YouTube and Netflix put user-generated Canadian content at the top, which means that they have to play with algorithms. It also requires that anybody that is directly or indirectly their content is generating revenue, that they will now be regulated by the CRTC, and they've said so. So almost everything on the internet generates some sort of revenue for someone. Somebody shares it, and there's advertising beside that particular content that's generated. So that means everything which has everything you post has a user identification on it, has an ad next to it. It generates revenue indirectly. Therefore, the CRTC can regulate it. We've got over 60 more witnesses that wanted to appear that the Liberals and the NDP together are preventing from appearing. There's a lot more work to be done on this bill. And as Mr. Bittle said, it's been 31 years. So another few months isn't going to hurt.
Mr. Julian, we have the government denying the bill regulates user content. Conservatives say it does, in fact. We did have the CRTC chair telling the committee that he believes the bill does allow for that authority for the agency to regulate user content, but he said the CRTC has no intention of doing that. So what's your view on all of this and user content, whether this, as some critics have said, is going to amount to censorship?
He also said that the Broadcasting Act already gives the CRTC power, right? So, yeah. I mean, this is the nuance that the Conservatives refuse to talk about, is that those provisions were already there. The CRTC finally was able to testify and answered, I thought, very effectively that question of the Conservative spin around this. Conservatives have also been saying that somehow C11 impacts the government following people on cell phones. I mean, it's been crazy, some of the things that Conservatives have put forward, that it's all about censorship. It's just bizarre. So I think our job as a committee is to go through the many amendments that people have offered that will improve the bill to finally get that work done. And quite frankly, the Conservative antics and the disruption over the last few weeks, I don't think has been a high point at all in Parliament.
Gentlemen, we'll have to leave it at there. Time is short, but this process continues to unfold over the next couple of days here in Parliament, so we'll keep our eye on it. Thank you all for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.